Him. By Richard Stashie. Copyright 2016 by Richard Stashie. All rights reserved. Story by Richard Stashie. Polishing and buffing by Oken. Narration by Rembots, F342, F4451, M2715, M2712, and BI3722. The Science Behind the Headhunters Part 1. So how did the zombie invasion begin? That mystery had plagued scientists for over 25 years, and they still had no definitive answer. They had dozens of theories, some even pointed to evolution or global warming as the culprit, but those theories were completely wrong. Why? Because the scientists refused to look at the obvious. Well, at least that's what the doomsayers were yelling. Okay, I'll cover some of the theories and the conflict between the scientists and the doomsayers much later. The important thing to know now is that zombies had existed for over 25 years. And thanks to the invention of the Lifeline, the nuisance was finally under control. The zombies dwelled outside the megacities. Some were scattered in the forested areas, while others were clustered in the metro ruins. A metro ruin was an abandoned big city. Any zombies that stumbled past the safety lines, a marker that was 20 miles away from a megacity, were quickly destroyed. One of the larger metro ruins was about 30 miles away from the megacity. The metro ruins were a constant reminder of how a civilization could be destroyed by chaos and anarchy. The zombie invasion initiated the mayhem, but it should be noted, it was not the main cause for the fall. 25 years later, God and Mother Nature had concealed the eyesores with an unstoppable haze of fresh overgrowth. The ruins had succumbed to a great mass of green, a chaotic mess of new life heaving from the rust and decay. Maybe, just maybe, in the next 25 years, the ruins would dissipate from existence. Grass was no longer assaulted by the mower, and weeds were left unplucked. Wild flowers sprouted in areas that had been forsaken, while trees grew out of manholes and parked cars. Some even found their way through the destroyed roofs of the abandoned buildings. The zombies didn't appreciate the beauty of their imprisonment. They roamed the grounds with an endless hunger. They had not aged in 25 years, but their wounds would never heal. Zombie control didn't see the beauty either, they only saw these green spots as more work. Historians note that greed contributed to the chaos, because man misjudged the situation. They continued to play risky games with the undead for financial gain. The mindset of a looter.
The dead cannot think, so why should we worry about their mindless assaults? They hunger for humans, so let them hunger. If one gets in my way, I will shoot it in the legs to disable it. The dead cannot communicate, so why should we worry about a lone zombie? We can take him out, and the others will be none the wiser. If it crawls closer, I will shoot it in the arms too. The dead cannot unite. We are superior to them because we can work together. You can watch my back and I'll watch yours. After all, we are much smarter than they are. I'm not so stupid as to crawl toward a person that just shot me in the arms and legs. If it gets any closer, I'll set it ablaze. Look, the stupid zombie is in flames and still wiggling towards me. Look how much faster I can move. Look at me, I'm dancing a jig around the flames. The zombie seems hungry. He seems to. Hey, where are you?
And those were among the first to die. If they only knew that the pleasures of material goods would hold no value today, the outcome may have been very different. Well, in theory anyway. The acting government didn't believe that theory. Once greed was identified as the killer, it didn't take long for the acting government to attempt to control it. The problem with controlling greed, as they soon found out, was that greed was an intrinsic human emotion, and any attempt at controlling or stifling human emotions would often result in depression, and eventually a rebellion. People in general tend to be greedy, because life in general places personal desires above personal welfare. Sure, there were a few humans who could overlook their personal desires, but most of them died early on in the chaos and confusion. They couldn't mentally disconnect the undead from their family and friends. The few that did overcome the emotional roller coaster soon adopted greed as a means of survival. They would kick all the zombies out of a giant mall and lock themselves in only to be raided by other greedy people. The acting government didn't need any more conflicts, especially since humans were still on the path to extinction. So as a way to shift the greed from a disadvantage to an advantage, they made zombie slaying a very lucrative profession. That was the grand design, to turn greedy looters into greedy zombie slayers. The path from zombie slayer to zombie headhunter was a long and winding one. The science behind the process was very tricky. For the most part, a slayer would go toe-to-toe, hand-to-hand, and face-to-face with their foe. This was a dangerous task, but their understanding of the creatures showed that close combat was the most efficient way of handling them. Before I start talking about the zombie headhunters, I would like to walk back a few steps. I think it's important to understand the tactics of the original slayers. What they knew about the animated creatures, and why it was necessary to transform the zombie slayers into zombie headhunters. Don't worry, it won't take long, and I find it quite fascinating. You never know, this knowledge may come in handy someday. The early slayers were your typical survivalists. Some were lawmen, soldiers, or hunters, but most were just people lucky enough to survive the zombie assault. They would band together to round up and slay all the creatures in an area. They tried many different methods. They were advised to burn the isolated buildings before the extraction of the undead, but this option was ignored because fire would often destroy the bodies and make it difficult to collect their bounty. Some would first sniper them from a distance, believing that this would result in a slight field advantage. A problem with this method emerged when some of the targets turned out to be humans. Also, there was no real advantage. The areas were no safer, since zombies were known to hide in the shadows, and many times they were not destroyed or disabled, though they often looked to be. What would be a catastrophic injury to a human would often just stun them. They would regain their senses and viciously attack anyone in sight. This often made the cleanup a more dangerous undertaking. Others would play a game of risk instead. They would enter a building and shoot at anything that moved, sometimes killing humans. Not only was this method unethical, it was stupid. The noise would alert the nearby zombies to the presence of fresh meat, which would lead to a more strenuous conflict, and more often than not, death. This method just created more zombies. Some attempted a hit-and-run method. They presumed it would be safer to draw the zombies out to an open area, than to confront them in a bottlenecked position. Their first attempt was a radio-controlled car with a loudspeaker. It would play an alluring sound, which would attract the zombies to the vehicle. Then amateur snipers would open fire on the undead, knocking them down with ease. The first attempts were both a success and a failure. The radio-controlled car idea worked well. Actually, it worked too well. The zombies wouldn't stop swarming the vehicle, even after the alluring sound was turned off. They would be affixed to the car, so there was no way to reposition it out of the line of fire. It would be turned into Swiss cheese, and more often than not a stray bullet would hit the gas tank, creating a barbecue. Zombies roasting on an open fire was not a good thing. They would often walk about, setting other things ablaze. Bulletproof vehicles were suggested, but the materials were hard to find and the weight hindered their mobility. Also, during test runs, many of the bullets ricocheted, so that idea was quickly scrapped. Another idea omitted the radio-controlled concept. Instead of an outside controller, the car would have a driver and a shooter. It would emit the alluring sound while the driver skillfully kept it at a safe distance. He would then drive it to an escape route as the shooter kept the path clear. Some tried to use the vehicle to lure the zombies through a gate and into an enclosed area. This only worked on paper. Zombies don't attack in a straight line, most were just left bumping into the fence. According to legend, during one test run, a driver became trapped. He wasn't able to exit the area, so he and the shooter acted like two crazy cowboys on wheels, a whoopin' and a hollerin'. They kept the alluring sound playing and drove in a big circle. They shot, crashed into, and ran down the zombies. For whatever reason, adrenaline or fear, they continued to drive over the fallen creatures until the car would no longer move. This hit-and-run attack went on for almost 15 minutes. When the dust finally settled, they saw over 100 zombies littering the ground. They were unable to stand up and attack, so collecting them was easy. The concept of the hit vehicle was born. It was soon developed into an efficient zombie slaying method. These cars would have guns mounted on the front, sides, and back. Some would have chainsaws and other cutting tools to knock down the undead. After they mowed them down, a small crew of slayers would shoot the devastated creatures in the head. This would immobilize them for collection. They were then piled into the back of a pickup truck and transported to a resource area to be tallied and destroyed. The use of hit vehicles made zombie slaying much more efficient, actually it made it too efficient. The rising numbers forced the slayers to use additional transportation. The pickup trucks would dump the rewards into a larger 18-wheeler, which would then transport them to the resource area. The act of carrying the heavy bodies from point A to point B, loading the pickup trucks, and then loading the 18-wheelers was time-consuming and difficult work. It required more manpower and security against random attacks, thus lowering the profit margin. The acting government saw this as becoming problematic. They were worried the weight of the zombies would slow down the massacre, thus making the elimination seem light years away. They feared it would overwhelm the slayers and they would abandon the project for simpler, greedier, occupations, such as robbing and looting. So the government worked up several other ideas to alleviate this problematic situation. One failed attempt was the zombie grinder. It was attached to the back of the hit vehicle. The idea was to help the slayers by placing the fallen creatures into a grinder, which would tally the kill and reduce the storage space. They would simply take the grinders to a base and be given full credit for the kill. Unfortunately, the cumbersome machinery caused problems during quick turns. It also required 3 strong men to lift a zombie at such an angle as to prevent jamming. Most of the hit vehicles only carried 2 adults and 3 children, so the grinders would constantly jam. The use of children is another issue that will be explained later. Most of the slayers preferred to use the grinder off-site. This added more work, since they were then required to immobilize and transport the creatures before grinding. In theory, the zombie grinders were a good idea, but in the field they proved otherwise. This forced the government to look for other options. They took a few steps back to understand what the zombie slayers were up against. The zombie invasion had puzzled the top scientists for years. There were many theories: a mutation, a man-made virus, a crashed satellite, or even aliens. Some said that maybe, just maybe, there was no more room in hell. Nobody was sure how it happened, why it happened, or even when it happened. If a priest opened the gates of hell, or if someone found Armageddon in their basement. But there was one thing they did know for sure.
Zombie bites do not cause you to become a zombie.
While it was true that the bite of a zombie could be deadly, so could the bite of a human. The difference was the amount of bacteria transferred during the bite. The zombies were teeming with deadly bacteria, like spoiled meat, so it would spread quickly. It would cause botulinum intoxication of the human bloodstream, and if not treated quickly, it was always fatal. Even with quick treatment, the odds weren't good. The speed of the infection often overwhelmed whatever treatment was given. Botulism poisoning was the #1 cause of death during the early days of confusion. Amputation was not a solution either. It would not slow down the process, but speed it up due to shock. The scientists stressed,
no matter how someone dies, they will become a zombie. Do not take chances, even when a loved one dies, destroy the body.
Historians noted the dark time in history when humans realized that they were fated to walk the earth in hunger. They called it the purgatory generation. Being fated to walk the earth after death had perplexed many faiths. Some pointed out that it might be a sign that there is no more room in hell. Since most faiths saw the evil of man, they used it as a tool, proof that God was angry and we must repent. Most scientists dismissed those religious people as whacks because the belief in God was seen as the antithesis of science. They saw no magic in the resurrection of the human body. The theory was, the human body becomes a zombie because it fails to go through the rigor mortis phase. Tackling the botulinum intoxication was the easy part. They developed an antitoxin vaccine to target the infection. It destroyed the bacteria before it could gain a foothold. On the other hand, developing a method to destroy the zombies proved much more difficult. It was discovered early on that the best way to immobilize a zombie was by a simple headshot. This was probably discovered within the first few hours of the invasion, since people were just as likely to shoot a zombie in the head as any other part of the body, actually more likely if they were horror fans. Scientists warned that headshots didn't actually kill the zombies. They noted that the headshot creatures would roll around in the dirt for hours, or even days, before freezing into a stasis. There had also been many sightings of headless zombies roaming the earth. So how did the headshot work? The Headhunter's Handbook explained it this way.
Even though the zombie is in full automation mode, the head is still the controller. The headshot takes away its ability to maneuver and its prime motive for killing, the hunger. It also takes away its most crucial senses: sight, scent, sound, and taste. Have you ever wondered why zombies don't just eat one another? Or why they don't attack victims that are sickened by botulism? They can smell the rotten flesh and are turned away by the odor. On the other hand, the fresh scent of human blood can incite a zombie to go on a rampage. But it's not the blood that motivates them, it's the leptin hormones that they crave.
I'll explain the zombie addiction in a little bit.
Zombies not only have a keen sense of smell, they have double or even triple the normal hearing. They are attracted to sounds. Even the smallest snap of a twig, or the slight sound of a gasp, can alert a zombie to the presence of a human. They also have a keen sense of visual awareness. Every movement, every odor, and every sound is spot-checked with a simple glance, but once they find something of interest, they gaze on it intently.
It was this gaze which many spiritual leaders used to make a strong argument: the zombies are a product of the devil. They are attracted to the aura of the living, and when they eat the living, they are eating their soul. The spiritual theory was debunked in the early years when soldiers used synthetic blood to lure the undead. Synthetic blood was not real blood, hence the name, but it resembled human blood in color, texture, and aroma. In fact, the substance was twice as pungent, and much stickier than real blood, therefore it was much more attractive to the zombies. So what was synthetic blood? To the general public,
synthetic blood is a concoction made from filtered zombie parts, which are crushed and liquefied to become the gooey substance.
The acting government also told the general public that
no human tissue is used in the manufacture of synthetic blood.
That was a lie. There were several attempts to filter zombie byproducts to manufacture synthetic blood, but the zombies rejected it. One top scientist theorized that
the leptin hormones of a zombie contain dead cells.
He further explained,
their leptin smells sour, thus it does not excite the addiction or the need to feed.
So what was synthetic blood? Well, the real dark secret of synthetic blood was that it was manufactured in secret prisons known as fat farms. Humans, usually criminals, but not always, were locked in a confined area and force-fed fatty meals to become overweight. Doctors would then remove the fatty tissue with liposuction. The fatty human tissue was then added to the synthetic blood. Public knowledge of these fat farms was limited, but it was widely assumed that the prisons were specifically designed to keep the prisoners from escaping, by confining them to a small cocoon. Their assumption would have been different if they knew that an automated system force-fed the prisoners. Most would consider this to be torture, but the mad scientist who designed it asserted that it was much cheaper and more efficient than hiring humans to supervise the inmates. HOP, House of Pain, did not inform the public of the real intent of the fat farms. In fact, most HOP agents were unaware of the intent. There was fear that such knowledge would evoke chaos, so they would use any means necessary to keep this information a secret. The acting government was known to enjoy their little secrets. So maybe there was a mythological connection between the zombies and the spiritual world, or maybe it was just the taste of fatty tissue. The taste was assumed to be the most critical motive, but then again, nobody knew for sure why zombies must eat. Their tissue was dead, so they needed no nourishment. It only seemed feasible that they desired the taste of human flesh. The use of synthetic blood straightened that argument, and the top secret government scientists spent years trying to figure out the connection. This was all thrown out the window when it was shown that a zombie without a sense of smell would eat another zombie, ignoring the sour taste. Besides the loss of senses, the headshot would also stop a zombie from attack, because the damage would shatter the brain and or detach it from the spinal system. It would almost instantly cause a zombie to lose its ability to maneuver. It was believed that zombies and humans shared similar brain functions, and the brain was constantly sending signals through the spinal system for movement. Some scientists even theorized that the zombies had the ability to think. Which was almost true, but the mentality of the zombie was limited to its needs. Did a zombie possess a conscience? Many scientists debated this issue. Some argued that if a zombie possessed a conscience,
they should be able to understand direct orders and communicate.
Another argument was,
a zombie's mind isn't completely developed, so we need to take a new direction to understand them.
And the classic,
zombies are the product of the devil, and you cannot reason with the devil.
It was believed that they had a limited short-term and or playback memory, but unfortunately it was hard to prove scientifically. There was simply no way to tell if they possessed a conscience, or if they could even form any rational thought. One program studied the zombie's mind. They attempted to build a special mind-controlling device that could turn the creatures against one another. The program was cancelled because the mind-controlled zombies couldn't determine the difference and ended up attacking each other. Some top scientists decided to overlook the consciousness argument altogether. They came up with a mechanical instinctive theory instead. They theorized that the zombies were just addicted to the leptin hormones. Leptin secretes a sweet scent which zombies can detect. It is found in adipocytes, which are the cells that primarily compose the adipose tissue. They are commonly called fat cells. The fat cells are then compiled and compressed into fatty tissues. The leptin addiction was the most logical theory, since that would explain why zombies needed to eat humans, and why they were willing to bite at any non-specific location. This was believed to be their prime motive for killing. Secretly, the leptin theory started the fat farms. Since the average human body had 20 to 30 billion adipocytes, an overweight adult could range from 75 billion to over 300 billion. The fat farms could produce 2 to 3 trillion adipocytes per person, bi-monthly. I must walk with the zombies, 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 zombies. This metro ruins would look something like Stonehenge, if the prehistoric structure was made of steel, broken glass, and brick, instead of just solid stone. There were a good number of charred buildings in the area which were standing in a large circle, similar to Stonehenge. Some of them had fallen and were leaning on others, while a few were just rudely lying atop the stranded cars and buses. Most of the destructive damage was concealed by wild overgrowth. It was as if Mother Nature saw the ruins as an eyesore and decided to cover it with trees, vines, and pretty flowers. So from a distance, the metro ruins looked like Stonehenge, lost in a jungle. The flora made the place pleasing to the eye. The zombies were unaware of their beautiful surroundings. To them the place had just become an obstacle course. They would mindlessly stroll through the weeds, trip over vines, or fall into giant cracks that were once roads. Some of them would continually bump into a rudely placed tree or post. Others would find themselves entwined in a slowly netted trap, never to escape or eat human flesh again. There was even one poor beast forever pinned by the roots of an old tree. Besides the abundance of greenery, there was also the faint sound of metal striking metal. This was followed by a mild tremor, a scraping against the pavement, a mechanical screech, then once again, metal striking metal. This noise was alluring to the zombies, and it was getting closer. It inspired them to investigate. Okay, I know I'm stretching the truth by saying investigate. Most of the zombies didn't think beyond what they could chew, but to them, where there was noise, there was food. This brings us to this one out-of-place looking zombie. He wasn't aroused by the metallic slap, and his clothing didn't look sun-bleached or have 25 years of wear. In fact, he wasn't a zombie at all. The character in question was poor Mark Short. He was walking with the others, but being overlooked by them. He was wearing a glowing crown on his head, which placed him in a strange zombie-like trance. He was just following his orders.
I must walk with the zombies.
The zombies near Mark were too aroused by the clashing metal sounds to notice a human, even one wearing a beacon on his head, so they just moaned and drunkenly led each other to the noise. The alluring sound was part of a trap designed by Zombie Control, ZOCO for short. General Michael Hayes was the figurehead of ZOCO. He was a former hit vehicle gunner, and at the early age of 17, was one of the first zombie headhunters. He was quite famous because the acting government pushed several glorified stories of his zombie hunting experiences. It was a form of propaganda that glorified and mass-marketed zombie headhunting. They also did a good job making the exhaustive work look easy. His image was used on many popular items, for example, the Headhunter Mike dolls, Mike's Zombie Head cereal, the General's Zombie Gore salsa, and Zombie Bloody Mary mix. There was even a cartoon,
Mighty Mike, the Lone Headhunter.
This was all part of the propaganda. His name and image helped raise support for the fight against the undead. The source of these seductive sounds were the scoops. They were the brainchild of General Hayes. Since he was a seasoned headhunter, he knew that metal crashing into metal was alluring to the zombies. Unofficially, it was an idea he got from watching an old science fiction movie, many years ago. A scoop resembled a red garbage truck, but with tank tracks for the back wheels. The tracks were necessary for the rough terrain. It also had an oversized shovel to scoop up the zombies. On the front of the vehicle, written in bold letters, was, "Zombie Control." This was intended to pay tribute to the movie. In the back of the vehicle was a compactor unit. That part wasn't inspired by the movie, but was necessary to speed up collection and reduce the number of stops. The typical scooping process. A scoop would inch forward as its oversized shovel scraped against the pavement to scoop up the undead. It would then lift and deposit them into the compactor unit, causing the metal shovel to crash into the metal frame. This would continue on until the compactor unit was full. Once full, an industrial alarm would shriek as the zombies were crushed to make room for more. Once the compactor could compact no more, it traveled to the extraction pit. Several scoops usually ran side by side on the abandoned streets. Following them were military men wearing riot armor. Some of these men would tug a hose between the large vehicles and spray the nearest zombies with synthetic blood. The sweet scent of this human nectar would arouse the zombies into a blind eating frenzy, but they wouldn't attack the humans, they would instead attack their sweeter-smelling brethren soaked in the synthetic blood. During this chaos, the scoops would shovel the orgy into the compactor unit. One of the zombies stopped dead in its tracks. It tilted its head back to get a better whiff. Its nostrils filled with the fragrant scent of fresh meat. The enticing aroma drew it to Mark short. It ambushed him, then dug its dirty claws into his arm and quickly took a bite, its sharp teeth tearing into tender flesh. He was being eaten alive, but he felt no pain as the glowing crown kept him in a hypnotic trance. He continued to follow his orders while dragging the beast along.
"I must walk with the zombies."
Another zombie tackled the couple to the ground. It then grabbed his head and bit hard. Sparks flew as its sharp and filthy teeth destroyed the glowing crown and penetrated his skull. He was instantly removed from his trance. He screamed and frantically pushed both zombies away. He attempted to run but stumbled from the pain. He was bleeding profusely from the head wound, causing more zombies to follow his bloody scent. He instantly identified the enchanting sound and ran in that direction. He screamed and yelled,
"Somebody please help me. I'm not one of them."
But the sound of the loud machines buried his pleas. A few soldiers sprayed him with synthetic blood and more zombies ambushed the poor man. Their feast was interrupted as an oversized shovel scooped them into the compactor unit. His last scream was drowned out by the industrial alarm. Once the scoop reached its capacity, the driver would travel a few miles to the zombie extraction pit, commonly just called the pit. The pit was a very large hole in the ground. It was filled with a steaming and putrid ocean of pulverized zombies. The typical dumping process. A scoop would dump several zombies onto a conveyor belt which would route them to a machine that would stamp their forehead, and add them to the census. It would then feed them into a grinder that would pulverize them and spray the juice into the pit. This process would continue until the truck was almost empty. Next, workmen would enter the compactor unit and use pitchforks to drag the remaining crushed bodies from inside. Any partial bodies were then matched with a found head, or put aside until a head was found, not necessarily the correct head, but a head just the same. A scoop backed up to the conveyor belt and dumped a crushed block of animated corpses onto the moving tread. Two workmen, Robert and Bill, used pitchforks to keep them in place. They also removed any headless bodies and put them aside. The truck shuddered a few times as the driver attempted to shake loose any remaining creatures. This rarely worked, so Bill jumped inside. He found several zombies tangled and crushed against the back wall. This was typical and made it a dirty job. The pressure and the sticky body fluids practically fused them together. Among them was Mark. He was still alive and struggling to break free. Bill stabbed the nearest zombie with his pitchfork and dragged it to the edge of the compactor.
"Tonight's game's going to be a shocker. Who do you think he'll win?"
Robert stabbed the moaning creature and pulled it onto the conveyor belt.
"Houston."
He answered the question like it was common knowledge. Bill dragged another one out.
"Houston? Are you serious?" "Yep, Houston, Jonathan E. is unstoppable."
Robert speared the quivering beast and pulled it onto the conveyor.
"You do know he's supposed to retire?"
Bill mentioned with a smile. Robert wasn't surprised by his question. The rumor had been roaring around the news for so long, that it was beginning to sound like a foregone conclusion.
"That's ridiculous."
Bill returned for more. Unfortunately he still didn't see Mark. He stabbed the beast next to him and dragged it away. While Robert waited for Bill's return, he thought about it and added,
"He's not going to retire, why would he? He's at the top of his game."
Bill dragged the zombie to the edge so Robert could reach for it.
No time limit, no penalties, and no substitutions. Do you really think he can last with all that stacked against him?
As Robert pulled the beast onto the conveyor, he sought for the perfect answer, but couldn't find the right words. He figured in a few hours it would all be history, so it was not worth arguing about. He just shrugged his shoulders. It wasn't a good answer, but it wasn't a bad one either. Mark pulled himself out from the crushed stack of zombies. His legless body scooted to Bill and moaned for help. Bill heard a noise and quickly spun around, his pitchfork raised high to stab his attacker, but he saw no one. He heard a whimper and looked down to see a man whittled and crushed. It was especially horrifying because the man was still alive. He screamed,
"We have a live one."
Robert instantly ran for the emergency shut-off and hit the button. An alarm screeched and all the mechanical devices instantly stopped. Bill comforted and consoled the dying man.
"Don't worry, help is on the way."
Mark could feel every ounce of life pumping from his legs, and the warmth of the friendly stranger. He knew he was dying, so he wanted to tell the man what he knew, what he saw, and all that he had experienced during his time in the trance. But he knew he didn't have much time left, so he whispered the only coherent word he could think of.
Da da.
Thank you for listening to my audiobook, Him. And I hope you'll listen to the next part next week. If you cannot wait, then maybe you could buy my ebook on Amazon. I'll have the Amazon link posted. Naturally, please post any comments, reviews and suggestions. If you like what you heard, please hit that like button. And subscribe, because that would be awesome.